Dan Severn actually fought in the early days of the UFC. He is a businessman, doing a very successful gentleman after his MMA career. And these are the kinds of people we like to see, that they're successful, they're doing well. And I'll tell you one thing, he had some real crushing knee smashes. Come on up.
All right. While they're getting the PowerPoint up here, I mean, I'll just start flapping my yap here a little bit. Coming in on the tail end of this discussion, I kept thinking, saying to Francisco, I'm thinking, boy, I'm coming into a little bit of a hostile type of a meeting here right now. I'm going to have to open up with a joke or two here right now so I can calm everyone down. But I'll simply say that I am glad that folks are very passionate about the athletes themselves, because, I mean, bottom line, there's a lot of athletes that their careers have been cut short, or they're not able to do other things now in life because they have suffered a lot of damage in the process of their careers, whether they be short or long, a lot of head trauma. And there's a number of athletes that they put all their eggs into one basket. I was, you've heard a number of people, they talk about me. I've always been kind of that businessman. Well, there was no money inside the Ultimate Fighting Championships when I first began. It was, as I always put it, it was a part-time hobby, is all it was. And really that's how I looked upon it. It was kind of like funny to get the ring name The Beast. For example, that was given to me by the legendary football player, NFL Hall of Famer, Jim Brown. He was one of the play-by-play color commentators for half a dozen of their shows. And when he first met me, in his words, he goes, Dan, he goes, when I first met you, he goes, I did not think that much about you. He goes, you're the only guy that showed up to the press conference wearing a sports jacket, a tie, and wearing your glasses. He says, I could tell that you're an intelligent man. And he goes, oh, I feel sorry for this man. He's about to get his proverbial ass handed to him when he climbs into this cage. And he goes, then watching you climb up into that cage, taking your sweaty old gray t-shirt off and climbing up that cage, it goes kind of like watching Clark Kent turn into Superman. He said, I never seen a person that has turned it on quite like that. And he even said to me, he goes, how'd you turn it on like that? And I'm thinking, Jim Brown is asking me a question like that. I kind of like got giddy like a little schoolboy there, because I watched him play football when I was still in high school. He was one of the most punishing running backs in the sport. He didn't run around people, he ran over people. He actually retired at a young age, and it still took, I think, 3 other men an additional decade of playing time in order just to beat his record. So to get the ring name The Beast, well, I thought that was quite the feather in my cap. But anyone knew me growing up, they knew what a big old pussycat that I really am. Dan the Pussycat Severn doesn't sell tickets, okay? Dan the Beast Severn did sell some tickets. So I've had 4 different careers in my life, and basically those careers are as an amateur wrestler, as a professional wrestler, and as a cage fighter. I have to say that kind of like that because there is a big distinction between the two. I basically was pursuing, I wouldn't even be here tonight talking to you folks right now had everything gone right for me as I was planning in 1984. I would have retired from athletics altogether with an Olympic gold medal. But things did not go the way they had planned for me. Instead, I'm the alternate, and I have to sit up in the stands and watch the person ahead of me not give up a single point, and he wins the Olympic gold medal. Everybody that he had wrestled, I had pinned in underneath 1 minute, and I had to sit up there. And it was due to politics. And that's the one thing that most people that actually really know me know I'm not a politician. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and I believe that there is truly black and white in almost all discussions. There might be a little bit of a gray area, but I'm pretty good about the black and white when it comes to getting things done. So being involved in a sport like this, how does one even start in a career? Because mixed martial arts, or I should say the predecessor, NHB, which stood for No Holds Barred, it came around 1994. My first profession Well, I said 92. My first profession was professional wrestling as of 1992 Olympics. I first jumped into that arena because I had been approached by a number of professional wrestling organizations during the mid-'80s. But I turned them down because at that time, had I turned pro, I would have lost my amateur wrestling status, and my amateur wrestling career meant too much to me. So basically, I turned that down. But then when 92 hit, a new rule came down from the United States Olympic Committee that allowed athletes to be both amateur and professional simultaneously, as long as you were not involved in a high school athletic program or a collegiate athletic program as an athlete, because you'd still be governed by NCAA rules or your high school athletic association rules. Well, I was well past my collegiate eligibility, so I could have my cake and eat it too. So I started doing professional wrestling, used my real name, used my real amateur wrestling credentials. I only had very few matches underneath my belt before a couple people that were associated with an organization out of Japan known as the UWF, they said, "Are those credentials legit?" I said, "Yes, they were." And they said, "You ought to be over in Japan doing this thing called shoot fighting." I'd never heard of it before. I gave them a business card, gave them an athletic resume. 3 days later, I get a phone call. 10 days later, I'm down in Nashville, Tennessee for a tryout. 30 days later, I'm in Tokyo, Japan. Don't have a clue as to what I got myself into. All I know is that my Asian opponent kicked me half a dozen times, really, really hard. My cheese done slipped off his cracker. I simply closed the distance, grabbed him, and I simply ragdolled him all over that mat to the Japanese audience. Amusement, surprise, cheering, and all I know is when I was done with the match, the gentleman that brought me over, he says, "Dan Saban, you will become superstar in Japan." And I'm like, I don't know about that superstar thing, but I'm not going to let anyone tee off on me the way that this guy was teeing off on me. And that was an interesting organization because it was a mixture of two different levels of competition. There were some matches, the first few matches were all legit matches. And then the second half of the card were all fixed outcomes. Now again, this was a professional wrestling organization, but they were a real strong style is what they were putting out there. So I was on the first half of the card for my first couple times going over, and they quickly moved me to the second half of the card because I wasn't going along with the proper protocol that they were looking for. So I like to think of myself as the monkey wrench in the system in a lot of different ways. Let's jump around and go back in time. I'm not certain what all is being shown up here, but fast forward to today, you can say that I'm one of 4 men in the world that have over 100 cage fights. I'm one of only 3 men in the world that have over 100 victories. Ironic part to that is I faced the other 3, I defeated the other 3, and the closest one to my age is 15 years my junior. Big John McCarthy was asking me just yesterday, he was trying to figure out how old was I when I really started. Well, I always say that I was close enough to 37 to call it 37, even though technically I was still 36 but by a few months. But I was, I always tell you, I started my cage fighting career at age 37. I always used the term cage fighting because I did not want it to try to explain what it was to move from no holds barred to mixed martial arts, because it drew out a long conversation. I would hope that most folks in here know the history of it, but I always tell people that in the beginning there was only 2 rules. Basically, there was just no biting nor eye gouging. And even then, it wasn't in terms of disqualification. You would simply be fined if you should use those 2 rules. So, lots of things have changed, and I'm actually happy because it has changed because, once again, I look at it, the bottom line, who is it affecting most? It's affecting the athletes themselves. Jumping into, let's see here. As I said, that the only reason anyone really knows me today is because of either climbing into a cage or climbing into a professional wrestling ring. But as I said earlier, my first career was a professional wrestler. I was working on the independent scene, and then I heard about this thing called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. But again, you got to go back in time to realize that pay-per-views were not prevalent like they are today. back in the 90s, pay-per-views were only offered in major metropolitan areas, cities, major cities, things of that nature. I'm living in little old Podunk, Coldwater, Michigan. I've never heard of the Ultimate Fighting Championships. None of my friends have ever heard of the Ultimate Fighting Championships. So one of the people that I was doing my training for professional wrestling, I would leave my home from Coldwater, Michigan, drive 2 hours to Lima, Ohio, to do a professional wrestling workout that would last 3 hours and drive back. So I would have 7 hours invested in one workout. So that's why I said I moved rather quickly into setting up my own ring and my own barn at the time. It's now no longer called the barn, because when your barn costs more than your house, I simply said to the better half, call it a training facility then. It's an easier pill to swallow, but at the same time, she's got all the goodies that she wants at this time as well. So being involved in the industry, kind of lost my train of thought there for a moment there, folks. Sorry about that. I'm actually much better, it's not really walking up there to simply flat my yap. I'm always better in actually a group type of thing where people are asking questions. And then I'm a great storyteller. So that's really what I'm telling right now, is telling stories. So jumping into my very first Ultimate Fighting Championship and hearing about it, there were just magazines. And there'd be these full-page ads. Do you want to be a no-holds-barred fighter, NHB fighter, things of this nature? And I'm thinking, Dan Severn's never been in a fight in his entire life. And it might be hard for you to believe that, but I have never been in a fight in my entire life. But I have been a competitor my entire life, and that's an entirely different mindset. I do not have to create any animosity towards an opponent over there. I'll shake your hand before, I'll shake your hand after. No hard feelings for about to come down the pike, because I understand the rules all too well, and I will use those rules. Because even as I'm hearing people that are talking about even what you guys are trying to do with the 3-point, the 4-point here for the protection of the fighters, bottom line, ask more fighters how they are going to train differently, how they're going to approach their matches differently, because based upon those rules, they will approach differently. Because even as I was simply trying to ask a few people around me, what is the current rule that they're looking at, whether it be 3 or 4 points. And literally, even if you allow 4 points, even if it would be weight bearing, I could see now an athlete coming across that cage on all fours like a bear crawl, knowing that as they go across there, they will always be hitting a minimum of 3 points, and a lot of times they'll be 4 points down. So literally, they will be a down opponent at all times. So again, I just want you to realize athletes think a little bit differently than what others do. Big John McCarthy. First time I ever met Big John McCarthy was inside the octagon. UFC number 4, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The ironic part is that I was given notice. I was a last-minute fill-in, really is what I was. Just a last-minute fill-in for the show. And I've always lived a rather busy life, doing a lot of instruction for amateur wrestling, and that's actually why I ended up buying the property I did in Coldwater, Michigan. Wasn't for mixed martial arts, wasn't for professional wrestling. My love of the sport of amateur wrestling, and I looked at I was going to probably just be a local college coach, a local high school wrestling coach. I'd have my own training facility so that in the off season I can run whatever types of camps, clinics, stuff like that I wanted to do, and then have to worry about getting permission from anybody else, because it's my property and I'll do whatever I want on my property. So that's kind of why I purchased the property that I did there in the first place. But then my training camp, I'm finally told that I'm in UFC number 4. I trained for all of 5 days, an hour and a half a day. I drove over to Lima, Ohio, because a professional wrestling ring is the closest thing that could come to a cage. Now, again, go back in time. At that point in time, there was only one cage, and it was owned by one company, the Ultimate Fighting Championships. And so, fast forward to today, you can go into almost any community, and you'll find some gym somewhere that's teaching mixed martial arts, whether they have a full cage, half cage, or even just a wall-mounted section of cage, and they'll be telling you we teach wall tactics, where we're teaching all kinds of competition this, competition that. Go to any bar on a Friday or Saturday night, and you'll see more UFC t-shirts and ball caps than you've ever seen, and they've got just enough alcohol in them. Most of these folks can't spell UFC, let alone do it, you know. I even had to, I've done a lot of appearances at sports bars, and as I tell people, I've never been in a fight in my life. I was closer to getting in a fight in the last 30 years than I was in the previous 30 years before that, because of going to these sports bars and doing appearances. I fine-tuned it to where I would not be going after a certain time frame, because I simply knew that a lot of the patrons might have partaken of just a few too many barley pops at that point in time. They're getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder there with you. And a lot of times when you're doing an autograph, they're like, well, you write like a girl. And I go, does that mean because you can actually, it's legible? You can actually understand this? I go, I'm an educated man. I know how to actually write my name. I've actually had lots of practice in writing my name in the process. But then they look at you, they'll say, I thought you'd be bigger than what you are. And again, I just always had these little one-liners like, well, you know, dynamite, you know, comes in a small package, but has quite the wallop there to it. And then they get, but I've had a couple times that people kind of press the issue just a little bit too far. I'd pull out one of my business cards, I'd write down a phone number, and I'd slide it over to them. And they're like, oh, what's that? I go, that's the phone number to the UFC. I said, I've never fought for free before. I don't plan on starting any bad habits now. But what you're going to like about this whole thing is there's a referee that's going to pull me off of you when I'm good and done with you. I said, I'm a proven commodity. Who are you, Mr. Barley Pops? You know, so go back in time again to where a lot of people. I've had more people when they've had a chance to speak, they're like, Dan Severn actually smiles? He actually has a sense of humor? Because most of the time I've gone to these different conventions, and I'll be at my table, I'll have some belts out there and stuff like that, and I'll have, out of the corner of my eye, I'll be looking over there, and I'll see a couple guys, they're talking to each other, pointing over towards me, and I'll look over towards them, and they won't even make eye contact with me. And I'm like, come on over there, guys. I said, I won't bite too hard, stuff like that. And I said, it's okay. I'm on my Prozac right now. We're good for about another, 30 minutes here before it wears on off. You know, so I use sense of humor in order to lure them on over. And then the most standard line is they'll say, like, after just a few minutes, like, you're not at all like we thought you would be. And I go, oh, what did you think I'd like to be? I'd be like some caged animal. I'd be like frothing at the mouth, jumping at the cage bars and stuff like that. And like, well, yeah. And sorry to let you down. And I go, that's all part of just being a competitor. But then also, being a competitor, I knew what I wanted to do when I walked inside this cage. I mean, professional wrestling had kind of prepared me a little bit, because professional wrestling shows you a great deal of continuity of wearing the same types of uniforms and doing the same type of things. And I had already came up with a couple things, knowing that I'm about to walk into this cage. I've had this really tough 5-day training camp, an hour and a half a day. Literally, if anyone would have shot the video footage of my 5-day, hour and a half training camp, you'd be using it as pure comedy. I had Al Snow. He's a professional wrestling trainer, worked for the WWF for a number of years, still works for the WWF in different capacities. Yeah, I guess now known as WWE, yes. And then, and two other professional wrestling proteges. And between the three of them, they had one pair of boxing gloves. So basically, they would be trying to kick, punch, and do whatever kind of submissions they could with a pair of boxing gloves on. And I just kept staying out of range. And then as they would throw, I would go into clinches, jam them up into turnbuckles, ropes, whatever, take them right on down, and I would slap on some amateur wrestling move, turn the amateur wrestling move illegal, make them scream or squawk, and that was the finish. So when I tell people, when I walked in the octagon for the very first time, you know, I didn't even know how to hold my hands on up. I've had more people laugh at me because if I ever did hold my hands on up, because striking ability, I did not have any striking ability. I was just a wrestler. Yeah, I'll say just a wrestler, but I was a world-class wrestler. I mean, I traveled the entire United States, traveled almost every country that has ever had a wrestling program, and have competed against the very toughest. And the toughest are the Russians. So again, when I go fast forward to a couple matches, I mean, if I can remember, I'll say something about my 2 matches there with Oleg Taktarov, because I already had a mindset the moment that I knew I was going up against a Russian. But, you know, going back to UFC number 4, I'm in UFC number 4. I head on out, and I don't tell a single family member, not even my wife. All I tell her is, I'm going to go off and wrestle this weekend, because I was already off doing professional wrestling gigs, so no big deal. She was kind of getting used to routine. And based upon my skill set, that's kind of really all I was going to be doing this coming weekend in the first place. You know, I'll say it's not exactly that, again, Dan Severn's on that black and white kind of category. I'm not fully telling a lie. I'm in that gray area of lying here right now is where I'm at. So I head off to UFC number 4. And what I don't know is a couple of my uncles happened to be watching the UFC, the show. And they call my parents home. Okay, my father's first name is Marvin. My dad very rarely ever answers the phone. He did this night. He answers the phone, and my uncle's like, Marv, do you know where your son's at? Well, first off, I have 4 other brothers, 3 other sisters. He first has to say, which one? Well, he's like, well, Danny. And my dad's like, well, isn't he down in cold water? And my uncle's like, no, he's climbing in his cage, and he's about to do this and that. And my dad's like, what the hell? And so after each match, you know, my uncles are calling them back, and my father back saying, okay, he won, he's okay, he lost, he's okay. And all I know is when I got home, I had a message to call your father. So here I am, 37 years of age, calling my father, and my father is bitching me out for making him nervous. So it's just one of those ways of saying, it don't matter how big, bad, and old you might be, you're still either daddy's little boy or mama's little boy in the process. So it kind of felt pretty good. All right? So the ring name, The Beast, I'll jump into one aspect of the Beast. The Beast has a lot of negative connotations. Anyone that knows Dan Severn knows that Dan Severn is not a negative person. I'm a very positive person. I have a teaching degree from Arizona State University, and I've been a teacher most of my life. I started teaching the sport of wrestling in 9th grade right back in 1971, and I taught at Arizona State University. That's actually what brought me out to the state of Arizona. I'm born and raised Michigan, not Coldwater, Michigan. Born and raised in I went to school at Montrose, Michigan. All my high school friends, they get mad at me like going, doggone it, you're not from Coldwater, Michigan. You made your high school wrestling fame from Montrose. Say Montrose every now and then. So for anyone that ever listening there from Montrose, I said it, okay. From Montrose, but I've lived in Coldwater since 92, and that's what people when they say, well, where do you live? Well, I live in Coldwater. So, for talking about the ring name, The Beast, has a lot of negative connotations. Dan Severn's not a negative person, so I came up with an acronym that I could live with. The word THE stands for Dan Severn. I'm a teacher, humanitarian, and I'm an educator. And my message to young people is Beast. To believe in yourself, to educate yourself, to adjust your everyday attitude, to study hard, and then to teach others. Because you can't take it with you. So you can never judge a book by its cover now, can you? So I just want to appreciate you folks for having me come here today and get a chance just to share a little bit about my background. And I'm here to help out in any capacity that I can to help move rules, regulations forward, because I'm all about the athlete as well. Thank you.